So before I introduce our distinguished speaker, I'm going to just give a quick summary about our seminar series here. So this is the Federal Leadership and Professional Development Seminar Series, and I started it back in September. This is our 6th seminar so far. So AHRQ Magic Group, thank you. AHRQ Magic has been sponsoring it, and recently Department of Health and Human Services Talent and Organizational Development Group has also been sponsoring as well. They provided the webinar platform for our most recent seminar. So the goals of the seminar series has been to provide an avenue for folks to share experience and lessons learned, also provide free training at a time when training resources are limited for many agencies, and also bring individuals together across the government and foster cross-agency connections, collaboration, and sharing. So far it's been very successful. Our last seminar reached 10 federal departments and OPM, so we've had folks coming from all over. So please do come in and select any seat. Welcome to come up to the table here. I just wanted to share a few quotes from previous attendees. So we've had a lot of success, and it's really been useful for folks to hear from other leaders across the government. So just a few quotes here. I also wanted to mention that I've been thinking about ideas of keeping folks connected and perhaps having some discussion between seminars, and so I've been considering turning that invitation list into a listserv, so basically an email list. So if I do this, you'll be able to opt out at any time. If you have any concerns or questions about this, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I have my email in the invitation and also here as well. So for people in the room, you will have seen the 7-foot tree by the registration desk. So the tree leaves are composed of lessons learned from previous attendees. So everyone that's in person has received a green leaf. At the end of the seminar, please put your lesson learned from today's seminar, and then there's a basket by the registration desk where you can drop off your leaf at the end. If you're attending remotely, please do email me your biggest lesson learned. And for more information, you're welcome to contact me. So I'm going to actually pull up Kevin's slide and then an introduction. I will let you pull it up so I don't mess it up. So I'll give a brief introduction. So Kevin Zachery, again, is the director of the Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA's Learning Institute at the Department of Health and Human Services. Kevin was born in France and raised in Alaska. He's been a student of leadership and leadership development since high school, when he was a commander of his Naval Junior Reserve Officer Training Unit. He attended the U.S. Naval Academy, served 11 years as a naval officer, and then taught leadership and ethics at the Naval Academy, while serving as the assistant chair for the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law. As a civilian, Kevin has worked with tech startups and nonprofit organizations. He's also been an independent consultant working with a number of government agencies, most recently the Department of Defense. He earned his master's degree in organizational dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania and is certificated in organizational leadership and management, development and change, and coaching. Kevin joined HRSA in April of 2016 as the director of the Division of Workforce Development, otherwise known as the HRSA Learning Institute. Today, he's going to be presenting on the topic of his thesis, the Leadership Catalyst Model, a new paradigm for helping leadership flourish in organizations. Please join me in welcoming Kevin.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kim. Thank you to Kim and the AHRQ Magic team for all the work they do putting these on. I enjoy participating in this. Anytime I get a chance to, share the things I do, I enjoy that. One of the things before we get started, I'm going to talk to you about this Leadership Catalyst model. It's a model that I created. But before we go, the idea is that there's different layers of learning that go on for folks. The first layer is exposure. So you get exposure to an idea, just to get an idea of what the concepts are. And then the next step is to actually be educated on it, where you get to learn more in the level of what each nuance of the thing means. Then you apply it, and then hopefully the final stage is where you can evaluate how you're using it and seeing how you can improve it. So the reason I brought that up is the idea for today's session is just exposure. So basically, I'm going to go through a lot of information. The idea is just to expose you to the concept of the model. My hope is that as you go forward after this, you'll see connections that from what you've heard today, but by no means is there an expectation that you're going to memorize the parts of the model or understand all the tools and stuff that I'm going to bring up. But you will be exposed to it, you'll get the concepts, and then we also will share slides for anybody who wants it afterwards. So how I want to start off is I want to talk about Gallup is a big organization that does a lot of work in organization effectiveness. They do a lot of surveys. They've surveyed people around the world, all levels of organizations, all types of organizations. And they've discovered that the impact the supervisor has in the workplace can be either very valuable to the organization or very costly. So it's really important to have these concepts of leadership because people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. So it's usually the manager that they just can't work with, and that has them leave an organization most of the time. So what I like to show organizations is this very simple sketch. It's a very simple relationship between the skills people have depending on what level in the organization you're operating at. So if you look at the blue side here, that's being relied upon for your technical skills. I don't mean IT technical, I just mean the technical aspects of whatever work you're doing. And then the green curve shows the level of people skills you should have. Now, when we have an individual contributor, we're relying mostly on your technical skills, coding, analyzing, all that stuff. We do have some expectation you have some personal skills. We want you to, say please, thank you, play nice with others, that kind of thing. Now, as you get promoted into supervisor, now we're depending on you a little less for your technical side and more for your ability to work with people and help develop others. And then so on up the levels, more and more the skills that an organization relies upon are those people skills. Now what happens though is a lot of organizations don't know that this relationship exists. So a lot of times people get promoted because they're the technical expert, or because they've been in the position the longest, or they're the squeaky wheel. If I get that person promoted, I no longer have to deal with them. Whole bunch of reasons that have nothing to do with the person's ability to lead and develop people. So the more that you can pay attention to providing opportunities for people to develop as leaders, the better. But because of this skill progression, here at HRSA, I've created the leadership continuum. Now, this is just a model that shows how we're organizing the development opportunities that we have here so that we can make sure that anybody knows, no matter what part of the level of responsibility you are in HRSA, that you know what training and development opportunities you can take to help you where you're currently at, as well as, in the green boxes, prepare you for the next step. So that way we're identifying, hey, you've just been made a supervisor, here's what you need to know about ITAS, about hiring, about leave, about telework. You want to be a director? Well, then here's some classes that you should take in order to prepare. So that's what we've done. Now, in the fundamentals there, these are the concepts that we want to expose HRSA employees to, and the Leadership Catalyst is one of those. So you're getting a preview of this. This isn't currently being built and rolled out here at HRSA. The other aspect that I want to present is Harrington Emerson here was an early organizational theory pioneer, and I bring him up because I like his quote about, there's a lot of methods out there, but if you understand the basic principles of whatever it is you're studying, then any method you learn you can apply. But if you're just going after every method, then it's just kind of like following each fad as it comes up, not necessarily knowing the specifics on how to apply it appropriately. So what I'm going to show you today with my model is actual principles that, should you go forward and learn stuff about emotional intelligence, for example, or Ken Blanchard's leadership, situational leadership model, you'll be able to apply it to these principles I'm going to show you today. So the Leadership Catalyst model, it's a mental model for producing more effective leadership behaviors, and it's based on neuroscience and cognitive psychology research. So it really looks at how human beings' brains are wired and how that impacts and how that influences the way we lead people, the way we improve our performance and that kind of thing. This was my master's thesis, so anybody that wants to see this can go to the University of Pennsylvania Scholarly Commons and download the PDF for free. But the leadership catalyst model, the premise is that a good leader is someone who creates, inspires, or develops better performance and leadership in others. So it's not about the person, the egotistical leader who's out in front with a torch, kind of going whichever way his whim leads him, so he's in the limelight, and people are just kind of falling off the trail behind him. And it's not the leader who's kicking and whipping people from behind and, burning their people out in order to get recognized. It's the leader that's kind of in the middle, saying, hey, the more that we're all leaders, the more we're going to accomplish. So that's the concept. Now, the way I've designed the model, you can see it kind of looks like an electron. So there's some elements of quantum physics that I've designed into this. I won't go into details, but the nucleus of this is about who are you being as a leader. So if anybody was sat in on my first talk I did in the series, which was about our two brains, the way our brains are wired, we have a system one that is our conditioned behaviors that kind of pops up when we're under stress or we need to do something real quickly. And the way that that's designed is it's our conditioned behaviors as we grow up. So they're not always the most effective or productive behaviors that we have. So the idea of who you're being as a leader, the more that you can take on kind of that noble purpose, for example, being a leadership catalyst or being in service to others, the more that you can internalize that, then what happens is that starts to add to your conditioning. That starts to improve your conditioning so that even if you're under stress, you'll be more likely to act consistent with that. So that's what this concept of being has to deal with. I'm going to try this. I have a YouTube video. For those on the phone, the video itself might be kind of choppy, but I'm told that the sound will come through, and it's really the sound that is the important part. So let me just show this real quick to show the concept.
Next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So break time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour, hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
All right. So that was what I wanted to show as the example of what I mean about being a leader. So the question asks, who are you being as a leader? One of the things I use is a quote by Thomas Edison. He said, if we did all the things we were capable of, we would literally astound ourselves. So part of what I see as my why as a leader is how do I teach people to better astound themselves at what they can do. Now, that's the one I kind of do in organizational venues. When I get more personal, this is the one I share. My noble purpose is to help people learn how to live more powerful, playful, passionate lives. So if I'm taking this on as who I am being as a leader, I can use this as a bellwether. If I'm in a stressful situation and I'm starting to feel antagonistic or in conflict with a colleague, hopefully I can take into account, hey, is who I am being consistent with helping someone have powerful, playful, passionate life? No. That gives me opportunity to change so that my behaviors are more authentic with that. So that's this concept of being in the model. One of the things I try to instill as kind of a culture for HRSA is, management is and he uses management, I use leadership, but still, Clayton Christensen is a big innovation guy, guru, he's well known. And he says, management's the most noble professions if it's practiced well. No other occupation gives you the chance to impact people's lives and help them improve, and in Thomas Edison's words, become more capable of astounding themselves. So that's one of the themes that I try to introduce. Now, the model itself is set up with 5 different components or 5 different ways of being that helps promote, encourage, or elicit better performance in leadership and others. So there's being mindful, being connected, being intentional, being generative, and being heretical. So being mindful. This is basically knowing how our brains are wired, noticing the source of our behaviors, and then being able to practice choosing those more productive behaviors in the moment when we can, the ones that are more consistent. If anybody has sat in on the first talk I did, I talked about System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the fast reacting part of our brain. So that's the emotional part of our brain. That's the conditioned behaviors that we have. And then System 2 is that prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part of our brain, where we get to choose what behaviors we use. And that's the prefrontal cortex in that. So I want to do a quick, and people on the phone can do this as well. Quick cross your arms. Okay. So that right there was System 1. That's your fast reactive. You've been crossing your arms since you were just a little kid. You've been doing the same way. You don't even have to think about it. Sometimes you might be in the middle of talking to someone and realize that you crossed your arms. Now, look at which wrist is on top and switch it. So it's a little bit more difficult because I've just now engaged System 2, your prefrontal cortex. I've asked you to do something new that you haven't had conditioned. So that's just a quick example of System 1 and System 2. So being mindful is knowing that we have these 2 parts of our brain. The other part of being mindful is knowing that our brain, the way it was designed, takes shortcuts in how we behave in situations. Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist who studied ways that our brain makes decisions that are not based on rational expectations. And a lot of what he came up with can be, and I know this is very small, the idea is not for you to have to try and read the text on this, but this is a map of about 168 different implicit bias practices that our brain employs. So for example, if you have too much information in front of you, then we're drawn to details that confirm our own existing beliefs. So that's the halo effect or the confirmation bias. We believe something, and since there's a lot of data coming at us, we pay attention to what supports our beliefs. So you can see how sometimes in a team, when there's different viewpoints, that can get in the way, but we're wired to do that automatically. So being mindful recognizes that we do stuff like that. Another one is the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error says we assign good reasons for why we do things, but when we assess what other people are doing the same thing, we assign less than positive ones. I was late because my wife was sick or my kid was taking a little bit too long to get to school. You were late because you don't care, you're broken, whatever. So that's a shortcut that we take. So being mindful means to be aware of that. The other thing is to be aware of, there are certain situations that we get involved with when our stress system, system 1, kicks in and drives the bus because our brain is wired for survival. So the away threat, moving away from threats, that's why the red arrow on this diagram is thicker because we're much more hyper alert to that. So we're much more aware of things for our survival. So we're on an alert for things that threaten our status, or when we're in an uncertain situation, or someone's trying to take away our autonomy. Those things are things that will grab us, put in a stressful situation, and we revert to that conditioned behavior, which again is not always the most productive or effective behaviors. Now what we got to try and do is shift our brain into the thrive side, which is recognizing things that are good for us, taking that higher noble thing of saying, hey, am I being consistent with being someone who wants people to live powerful, playful, passionate lives? That's helping thrive. So those are some of the concepts around being mindful. How you can be more mindful. Plato says to know thyself. That's one way to do it. So MBTI is a method. DISC, these are all ones that a lot of us have done. Some of the folks in HRSA have done the leadership wheel, which is one that was created by a professor I had at the University of Pennsylvania. The reason I like it is if you notice there's a red square or red shape and a blue shape. So the blue shape, this is my score, are my behaviors under normal conditions. So it shows where my strengths are, and then it shows how my behaviors shift when I'm under stress. So taking this, I'm now more aware of how my behaviors shift to less productive behaviors when I'm under stress. So now that I know what's going on, I can do something about it. If you don't know something's broke, you can't fix it. So that's part of the issue there. Knowing which of our two brains. So how to become more mindful, you come take my our two brains class, which is a 3 to 4 hour class, which some of the folks in HRSA have done. And we get into more detail about the mindfulness part. The second one is being connected. So this is a good leader needs to focus on establishing deeper and more trusting relationships with people. If you think about it, most of our relationships at work are very surface level. They're acquaintances. But high-performing teams, the more that these folks know each other on a human being level, the more effective they are. We have a little bit more empathy if we know more about people. Doesn't mean we're best friends forever, but if someone's a little cranky at work and I know that their 1-year-old kid at home has got is sick and is not sleeping well and that guy's probably tired, I'm going to have a little bit more patience and empathy and a little more grace with that person than if I'm treating them like an object and looking at them for what they can give me to help me with my concerns or what challenges they are in me getting my concerns, or if they're irrelevant and I just don't care. So that's what being connected means. I got this from when I was teaching at the Naval Academy. We used a leadership model that we adapted from a speech that Admiral Stockdale, who was a very well decorated naval officer, ran for vice president at one point, but he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7 or 8 years. But he said that there's 5 obligations that a good leader should have. And one of them was his concept of being a steward. investing in the lives of others and valuing those individual differences. So I kind of took that to heart and expanded it for my model into being connected. Now, I wanted to also talk about the neurological side of being connected. So Daniel Goleman, very well known with emotional intelligence and looking at how the brain plays into that, he says in a 2009 interview, he was talking about two new dimensions that were discovered through neuroscience. The first one ties together our emotional center and our ability to use the rational part of the brain. So it's kind of that recognizing that there's a system 1 and a system 2. So the being mindful. The second dimension has to do with the social circuitry of our brains. Our brains are wired for social connection. That's where empathy occurs, connection, being able to persuade or inspire people. So he says that no matter how good you are as an individual performer, if you lack social intelligence, you will fail as a leader because it's your communication skills, it's your interpersonal interactions that determine how well other people will do under your leadership. So that's an imperative to be connected. So how can you be more connected? Well, the first thing is to recognize nothing gets done by one person. One person can do a lot to drive results, but it's a team of people that get things done. So knowing that it takes a team, together, everyone achieves more is one way I've seen of, the list of a team. So this, just recognizing that concept. You're not a shining star, you're not a lone wolf, you have a team that's there to help perform big things. So this kind of a shortcut way to say is when you're working with other people, be interested, not interesting. So the more that you're interested, the more that it's about the other person as a human being rather than an object. If you're being interesting, that means that you're caring more about how you look or being the sage on the stage and I have the best answer in the room or I have the last word. That's not a way to achieve things when you're leading a team. Again, recognize that your role as a manager is to help develop and improve other folks because the more that they can do, the more everybody's going to be able to do together. So that's being connected. So one of the stories I wanted to share has to do when I was in the Navy. They have this way of dealing out punishment to sailors in the Navy called captain's mass. Now in the old days, there was wooden ships, this basically happened in front of the mast of the ship where the captain would mete out punishment. Sometimes it was flogging, sometimes it was other things. Nowadays, it's just, in a room with the captain and whatever transgressions you did, the captain says, hey, here's what you did. Here's, sometimes you'll have witnesses and they'll say, okay, I'm gonna give you punishment. So when I was at the Naval Academy and we were creating courses for character development and we were talking about the concept of this, being a leader and taking care of your people and being a steward, and in this case being connected, the guy that was leading the discussion in 2006 shared a story of when he was in 2005 on a ship. He was the executive officer and he had a case come up where a young sailor was in and out of trouble on the ship. There'd be periods where he was acting okay, but then there would be periods where he was acting out and causing problems. So the ensign, the 01 young officer who was his supervisor, basically threw his hands in the air and say, this needs to be handled at captain's mass. So what happens is the executive officer reviews all of the cases beforehand to make sure that the paperwork's done right, making sure that we're doing everything we need before we bother the captain with this. So he brought the young sailor in and was talking to him and found out basically the sailor had a very poor reading level. And what would happen is every time he went to go take the advancement exam, he couldn't read it and he couldn't pass it. So then he'd get frustrated and he'd act out. You can imagine someone that frustration. You can't move up in the world. You're ashamed that you can't read, so you don't tell anybody. You're supposed to be a sailor and macho and take care of things. So the executive officer found this out and basically brought the ensign in and said, hey, did you know this guy couldn't read? And the ensign didn't know that. So what happened is the kid went to captain's mast because he, whatever he was charged with, he did commit the crime, so to speak, and so he's going to pay the time. So what the captain did was, well, and let me just show you real quick. Here's what the options are. So he can be restricted to the ship for 60 days. He can be assigned 2 hours of extra duty after the workday for up to 45 days. Sometimes you can forfeit half your pay for a couple of months. At the very most, the captain can put you in the brig and subject you to food and water for 3 days. And those are for really, big transgressions. So in this case, I'm not quite sure what the punishment was, but one of them was assigning the sailor 2 hours of extra duty each day for up to 45 days. And then he turned to the ensign and he said, you are going to teach him to read in those 2 hours. So every day after work, the regular work day, the ensign, and the sailor was restricted to the ship, so he couldn't leave even if they were in port. He couldn't leave the ship. So every day after work for 2 hours, the ensign and him worked together on teaching him to read. So as it turns out, the guy is done with his punishment and he's back working, takes the next exam and he passes it. And he's become, I'm sure he wasn't exactly a model, shining example, but he was definitely no longer the troublemaker that he was. The XO did not realize, though, the impact of doing this until a couple of months later when he got a letter from the young sailor's daughter, who wrote a letter and said, "Thank you for taking care of my daddy. He doesn't beat my mom and I anymore." And I get choked up every time I tell this story. That's the impact of being connected, is recognizing that, people don't wake up in the morning, jumping out of bed, excited, saying, yes, I get to cause chaos at work today, or I get to cause chaos in my family. So when people don't show up that way, something's getting in the way. So that's the thing to remember. That's the connected part of this. So the next step is being intentional. So this is basically kind of two parts. One, taking responsibility for your actions and behaviors, how they affect other people around you, especially if you have direct reports who are hyper aware of your mood, hyper aware of the, because you've got this, you regulate whether they can take vacation time, whether they can telework, what duties they assign. So people, your direct reports are very hyper aware of your moods. Now, sometimes you might be having a bad day. Maybe you came in from the parking lot and you stepped in a puddle and now your shoe and sock are wet and they're going to be damp for a while. So you come in the office and you snatch the messages out of the secretary's hands and slam your door. Well, no one knows what's going on. So our brain, which is wired for survival, says, oh, crud, something's going on. Someone's going to get fired. Well, you know what? I was going to give them this report on the status of this project, but it's got some bad news in it. I don't want to be, subject to that. I'll just tell them later, or I won't tell them, or there's a whole bunch of repercussions. So being intentional means taking responsibility for that, but then also taking responsibility for doing specific intentional actions with your team to develop them. So how can you be more intentional? That's the question you can ask yourself in any situation. Hey, how can I be more intentional with this person? Or how can I be more intentional with this team? So here's some ideas. 360 feedback. Know how others perceive you is one way to be more intentional. Find out how you're perceived and then learn from that and come up with a plan to work on a few areas. Sometimes you might find out that people see you as this real domineering person when that's not who you are, but that's how you come across. So I have a system or a 360 that looks at inputs from anonymous inputs from direct reports, peers, colleagues, friends, family, and then you also have that person grade themselves, because a lot of times we'll have a better view of our grades on different competencies and skills than the people who see us. But there's a lot of insight in that. So that's one way to be more intentional. Find out how you're being perceived and then adapt or address those things that aren't as effective or as good for being a leader. Understanding group dynamics is another way. So this is another training part of the team building that we do, is understanding group dynamics. Here's one thing that you can look at to understand the group dynamics. Tuckman's 5 stages of team development. We've all heard forming, storming, norming, and performing. Another one that is commonly used is Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. So good teams trust one another, engage in conflict, commit to decisions, holding one another accountable. So those are ways to be intentional with your teams. That's why I was saying, now that you know this concept of being intentional, now you can use different methodologies. You can use situational leadership model by Ken Blanchard. You can use the emotional intelligence model by Daniel Goleman, and you know what it's in service of. It's in service of being intentional, actually moving the ball down the field. Assessing team performance is another way to be more intentional. Feedback on your team is a gift. I do one that's the group management questionnaire. So this looks at a team based on 72 statements of what are best practices of high-performing teams, and they're done in these different categories. How does the team handle conflict? What's the climate? Do they know their goals and purpose? How's communication? So it assesses these, and you can usually find out, like in this example shows, the questions at the bottom, the numbered items, those are issues where less than 30% of the team says that exists. Well, now right away, you can be intentional and say, hey, let's go to work on a couple of those right now. We know where to go to work and we can make some movement. So that's all the being intentional part. The next one is being generative. This one is especially applicable because of all of the talk that we have about employee engagement. Employee engagement, again, Gallup and others have shown 3 out of 5 people in the United States are not engaged at work. So the more that we can do to generate engagement as a leader, the better. So this is, identifying for yourself and your team that powerful vision that gets people in action, that has them not, has them doing things like not saying, oh, that's not my job, but put in some of that discretionary effort. So how can you be more generative? So Simon Sinek, excuse me one second. Sorry. Simon Sinek has a really good book out called Start With Why. And he says, if you belong to a team or a division within an organization, if you articulate the why for that team, kind of like who is that team being, what are the values that it's going to stick to, how is it going to operate effectively, then that can be very powerful in having the team be engaged, generate action and generate engagement. So he talks about the golden circle. So we all talk about what we do, and that's fine. But when you get to the why, which is, again, goes back to the video clip we saw, when he asked Mr. Duff to sing, the guy sung as what he was, a music director, as a practiced music teacher. But when the comedian, Michael Jr., added in, now I want you to sing from your why. That person inspired and grateful for a life in spite of things that have happened. You can see that was a more engaging. How many in here was more engaged and sat up a little straighter when he sang that second time? So that's the kind of that generative spirit, that generative actions that a leader should be doing. Here shows how this is tied to neuroscience. The what, the why, and the how are a very emotional connection. So this speaks to our limbic system in our brain. There's no words, there's no stats in our limbic system. It's just emotions and feelings and inspiration, that kind of thing. So working at the level of why and how engages you at the limbic system. And then the what is where the neocortex fits in and says, okay, now that I'm inspired, now that I want to do this, here's how I'm going to do it. So just to show you an example, my golden circle, I showed you already, help people learn how to live more powerful, playful, passionate lives. How I do that? By providing insights into performance improvement based on neuroscience and cognitive psychology research. That's how I do it. What I do, well, right now, the current way I do this is by leading HLI, HRSA Learning Institute, and providing those development services to the staff. Now, this is in service of my team's why is to create a culture where HRSA employees seize learning and development opportunities to reach their full potential. So in that why gives us a whole bunch of avenues that we can go to work and make a difference that are not just creating a class and teaching it. There's a whole bunch of other things that we can look at. How do we communicate it? How do we help others create inspiring messages for their initiatives? There's a whole bunch of other things that are now open to us to do in the spirit of that. And then HRSA's why, providing quality health care to nation's underserved populations. That's a powerful why. One of the things that I do when I start training is I go around the room and I ask people, tell me your name, tell me your position, and tell me why every day you choose to come here at HRSA. We all have skills that could be used anywhere else in the government as well as out in the public sector. Why is it that you choose to come to HRSA every day? And the reason I have asked that question, and most of them, a big number, is because of HRSA's mission. They believe strongly in it. So what I try to do is connect them to that generative purpose, because in the bureaucracy of government and the bureaucracy of a big organization and all of the regulations that we have to do, sometimes we can lose sight of that and be just kind of, not downtrodden, that's not the word I want to say, but kind of numb to that. We lose that connection to that purpose. So when I do the training around group dynamics, around being mindful, I try to instill that, hey, this is in service of a big purpose that you guys have signed on to that's worthy of your time and effort. So that's what this is all in service of. Now the last one is a little bit unusual. It's called being heretical, and this is being for the success of the organization while also being open to new ideas and having the organization live up to its ideals. So in short, this is don't get trapped by the artificial constraints of an organizational culture. A lot of times we try to do something new and you hear things like, well, that's just not the way we do things around here. Or, yeah, we tried that before, but it didn't work. So a good leader, a leadership catalyst, doesn't let themselves get trapped by that. Now, most of the time when we think of heretics, and I don't know if they still teach Galileo. I remember growing up learning about him and how he was a heretic and what a bad thing that was. But it wasn't until much later when I was researching this concept that I realized Galileo was a very devout Catholic. He was very much a member of the church and what the church stood for. He was so for what the church stood for that he wanted to let them know, hey, there's something important we should know to better serve, our congregations and stuff. So he was labeled as a heretic because he kind of went against the authority of the church. But the idea is that being a heretic is not a bad thing. That doesn't mean go, be an anarchist and just disrupt things to be disruptful. It's really in service of the higher purpose of the organization that you're doing this with. Edgar Schein, so one way to do this is to learn more about your culture. Edgar Schein is a real well-known organizational development person, and he said here, this quote, "The only thing of real importance that leaders do is create a managed culture. If you do not manage culture, it manages you." Some may remember a quote that's attributed to Drucker, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So it's kind of in that same vein of recognizing the impact that culture can have. So, the more that you can look at the culture, how is it organized? How are the business processes managed? Are we doing those in a way that's consistent with achieving our purpose? Look at espoused beliefs and values. What are the core values of the organization? And how are we using them? Are we holding ourselves to them? What are the guiding principles? Are we holding ourselves to those? Sometimes an organization will say, here's our guiding principles, and print them out, put them on the wall, and then never look at them again and don't even follow them. But we espouse, that's what they are. And then there's underlying assumptions. So, a lot of times you hear the underlying assumption is, hey, if I do all these meetings, then I can say I've gotten something done. Well, underlying assumption is if you're doing meetings, then you're in action. But are you getting anything done? It gives a leader a perspective to say, you know what, is there something that we can be doing differently? So that's being a heretic. It's kind of noticing a common phrase is, the fish is the last one to know it's in water. So, fish doesn't know that there's anything different than water. So if you can pay attention to the water you're swimming in, well, now you can see what might be outside the box that's going to make a difference. So basically, being a heretic just means trying to not get caught in that false trap of the culture, of the constraints that the organization might have. Now, how you can be more heretical. Looking at organization, assessing it. So these are two different tools that I've used. One's the Organizational Character Index, which looks at organizations through the lens of MBTI, basically, so that you can learn a lot. The other one is a Organizational Culture Assessment Instrument, which has got 4 different types that can give you some insights into how your organization is, especially if you want to change. If you say, hey, you know what, for us to be successful 5 years from now, we're going to have to bring in some different behaviors. We're going to have to reward different actions and behaviors. And this is ways that you can look at that to be kind of heretical, but also intentional. So another way to be heretical is to change your perspective. So this is another Navy story that I have. I was a division officer, a lieutenant on a guided missile cruiser. I was the damage control assistant. So I was in charge of training the whole crew on how to fight fires, how to prevent flooding, or to fix flooding, how to protect against chemical, biological, radiological warfare, and that kinds of stuff. So I was walking through the passageway, which is the hallway, on a ship, and there was a young sailor swabbing the deck or mopping the floor. And he was grumbling because people were kind of walking through on his floor. And I just stopped for a second. I said, what's going on? He says, I can't believe this. Join the Navy, see the world. And I'm here, I'm a janitor. I'm cleaning the floor. And it's just going to get dirty again. What's the use? And so I had to stop, and I had to give him a different perspective. I said, hey, you know how we have inspectors coming on board? In the Navy, each ship gets inspected for everything that it does. How it does its weapons, how it does its fighting at sea, how it does its firefighting and damage control, how it does its administration stuff. And there's teams that come on board to inspect and evaluate how well you do your work. I said, you know how we have this team coming on next week that's going to take us out for 2 weeks and test us on everything on our ship? He says, yeah. I said, well, the first thing that they look at when they walk down the pier towards the ship is how clean is that ship? Because if they walk onto a ship and it's grubby and dirty and the brass isn't polished, then they know that these people don't have attention to detail, that they're not engaged, and they're going to look harder at how we're doing things. I said, what do you think, when you go down to berthing after the cleaners have gone through there, how do you feel? And he's thought about it, and he says, you know what, I feel a little bit more energized because I've been down there a couple of times where it didn't get clean and it was kind of dank, and it's 30 people living in a berthing area. I said, yeah. So the object isn't to say I'm a janitor cleaning a ship. You're showing that the people on this ship care and that we take pride in our work, and it's going to make a difference as soon as that inspector steps on board the ship, that very first step. I said, and here's another challenge. I said, you're not accountable for the ship like the commanding officer is, but you can choose to take responsibility for the success of the ship. He said, well, what do you mean take responsibility? I'm just a enlisted, junior enlisted sailor. So, well, if you were to pretend that you're the commanding officer of the ship, you will look at things differently, and you will see things that could be fixed in the moment to improve the conduct of the ship. And he thought about it, and he said, okay, I'll try that. And he felt better about mopping the floor. I mean, it still wasn't fun automatically for him, but he definitely had a better attitude. So a week later, I was walking along the outside of the ship, and I see this guy kind of mixing with his buddies, and all of a sudden he turned and he yelled at a shipmate of his, and he pointed to him. He says, hey, Joe, pick up that wrapper and go throw it in the garbage. Now, it was another guy that, he didn't have any control over him, but because he had this concept that I can be responsible for the success of this ship, well, that means, hey, if someone's throwing trash on my deck, I'm going to tell them and call them on it. Now, that was not behaviors that he would have had accessible to him until I gave him that different perspective. So that's kind of that function of being a heretic. What are those different perspectives that you can take that will give you different options for performance? So that's the leadership catalyst. That's just kind of the exposure to the model. Like I said, if you Google Scholarly Commons, University of Pennsylvania, and search on my name, you'll find the PDF. I will warn you, it's 250 pages, so I don't recommend printing it out. Just read it online. But that's the end of that's the concept that I had to share with you. The last little part, you know, that a good leader should follow something like this. Lao Tzu said, "With the best of leaders, when the work is done, the project completed, the people all say, we did it ourselves." Because it's not about the leader, it's about getting things done. So that's my thing. We have time for questions if anybody's got a question. What I will ask is if you do have a question, turn on your microphone so the folks on the phone can hear you. Thank you. So, does anybody have any questions? All right. Oh.
Thank you, Kevin. You know, it's a very inspirational speech. One question I have is, you talk about connection, right? How do you separate between connection and being neutral once conflict comes?
So connection being then separate from being neutral. So something that I just learned, there's a book on Books 24/7 that's part of the HHS LMS. It's called The Outward Mindset. It's by the Arbinger Institute, and they have a very, very nice treatment of this. And they said that, you know, we have a choice on how we deal with others. We can treat them as objects, or we can treat them as people. So they call it an inward mindset or an outward mindset. So if I have an inward mindset, that means I'm worried about me and mine and how I look and what I need to be seen as or whatever. So I'm not looking at people as human beings, I'm looking at them as objects. Are they someone who can get me what I want? Are they someone who's in the way of me getting what I want? Or are they irrelevant and I don't spend much time on them? But if I'm outward mindset, then I also have their concerns and their objectives. I recognize them as human beings and take that into account, which can then make me connected and change my behavior. So I definitely would recommend anybody who accesses Books 24/7 check that out, because it's a very good treatment of being connected. If you're neutral, it means that you don't really care if they can't help you or if they're getting in your way.
I guess my question is a little bit, so once you get connected, you know, just by human nature, is, you know, sometimes you cannot stay neutral. You have, because your connection actually affect how you deal with people. Well,
sure, no. Being connected doesn't mean that you won't necessarily, you know, have tough words for somebody or, you know, give them directions. You can still do that. But if you're doing it from a connected perspective, you're doing that more authentically with them as a human being rather than being demanding and dictatorial or, you know, angry or walking over people. So is that more in line what you were asking? Okay. Yes.
Hi, David Eber from AHRQ. Thanks for a provocative talk. I was interested a little bit about the HRSA Learning Institute and how, I mean, so today you exposed us, right? So how do you help HRSA or any other group that you're working with to, you know, apply the principles and go beyond just exposure and education? So
thank you, that's a good question. So the leadership continuum shows that we're developing curriculum for every level, and we're weaving the leadership catalyst in, we're weaving the neuroscience into every element. So what we're creating right now is online e-learning that's the fundamentals. So it's about the neuroscience, it's about the leadership catalyst model, it's about Goleman's emotional intelligence concepts to give people the models. And then when they take their first leadership course, whether it's project management or difficult conversations or whatever it is, we'll refer back to those to show how this fits into those principles. And once we create the online e-learning, I definitely plan to, share it to any of the other organizations because it'll be very easy to adapt for themselves. But that's how we're doing it. We're folding all of this in so that at every level, the conversations are consistent with those concepts. So when we go into handling conflict, we can talk about, so when you're in a situation where there may be some conflict, who are you going to be in that situation? Are you going to be the 10-year-old throwing a tantrum, or are you going to be, hey, I'm a leadership catalyst and I make a difference for people. So it really definitely will flavor your behaviors when you're in that circumstance. Did that answer? Okay, great. Yes.
Hi, Ty Hughes with OPM. Thank you again, this was terrific. I have a question regarding the Leadership Catalyst model, and I want to know about your comparison and contrast, whether it works equally well in professional circles, as in at work, as maybe in personal or family dynamics, and where you must express leadership.
I'm glad you brought that up because, I started out with this as a concept because at the time I was the leadership and organizational development consultant. So when I was doing my thesis, I wanted to do something that was going to, be useful in my work. I didn't want to just do something that, checked the box. So I was thinking in that leadership model. However, a lot of the stuff that I teach about how our brains work and that group dynamics, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it in a work environment or a home environment. So in that case, leadership catalyst is kind of a misnomer. It really is kind of more of a performance catalyst or a relationship catalyst. It's how can I be more effective in my relationships? How can I, whether it's familial relationships or it's in work relationships where I'm trying to get stuff done. So it really doesn't really matter. It's the same principles of how can I make sure that I'm tapping into using my powers for good, so to speak. Yes?
So how do you convert this, whatever you said, like the why, we listen to what you said and everybody's pumped up and we walk back to our desk and, how do you convert that into like a habit so that, it's consistent?
No, that's very good because one of the difficulties, so remember when I showed you the crossing your arms and then doing it this way. So I can do this pretty quick because I've been doing this for years, doing this thing. So I've created the new neural pathways. Now, one of the challenges, and Daniel Goleman talks about this in his book, Primal Leadership. He says, one of the challenges is that we learn leadership from what we observe as we're growing up. And it gets brought in just kind of implicitly. It's not like we're focused on it. So what happens is when we're in those stages of conflict where we need to respond, what we tend to do is act like we saw our parents acting or coaches acting and, outbursts. And a lot of times if you're, mad at somebody, you might say something and think in the back of your brain, man, I sound just like my dad. It's because you were conditioned that way. So the challenge is, in order to change this, you've got to practice behaviors over and over and over and over. So one of the challenges from a development perspective is I have to create training opportunities that use spaced repetition and have people practicing it. Sometimes just having the epiphany is enough for someone to take on and at least starting to put it into place. One mechanism that is useful, though, is if you do want to change your behaviors, it's called affirmations. You take a 3x5 card and you write 2 or 3 sentences in present tense, in positive voice. I am a leadership catalyst. I make a difference every day in the people I work with. I make a difference every day in the projects I'm involved with. And you put that out, and every morning you read that out loud to yourself. And then at lunch, you read that out loud to yourself 5 or 6 times. What that starts doing is creating neural pathways that get more and more pronounced in your subconscious so that in those moments where you are surprised by something and need to cross your arms the new way, then those neural pathways are there. So that's one way to start doing the practicing. I've done a challenge with and this goes for you too. If you were to do that, after 30 days, if you didn't find yourself acting differently or behaving differently, I'll give you $20. I've been doing this for 15, 20 years and no one's ever come back to me for money. It's just because what that does is it really ingrains at the subconscious level, here's who I am, here's what I'm about. So that's one way. The other way, though, is through development that expands over weeks so that you have a training session to learn, say, being mindful. And then over the next couple of weeks before the session where you learn about being connected, you've got homework and you're doing journaling. And there's a whole bunch that goes into changing behavior change. But it's a little bit harder. But the first step is recognizing that there's a different way of being and then putting that intention out there. That was a long answer, but okay. All right. And was there something online that was a question? I thought I saw a note. Okay. All right, well, I think we're done. Kim, anything else?
No, thank you so much, Kevin, and thanks everyone for coming. And we are working on getting a video out, so hopefully we'll actually have a recording of today's seminar. If not, we'll work on getting the slides out. But thank you so much. And our next seminar that we have scheduled is May 21st. We have Becky Johnson coming from Treasury to talk about employee engagement. So thank you all for coming.